kind of what you're like in the room, you know, those, so we can cover kind of all of those subjects. So if we start just with audition, I think what I'll do is just start with a couple of things that I think are important. And then after that, if anyone wants to jump in at any point, then feel free to, because there's like a good amount of people with only, what's there, 6, 7 of us here. It's like a good enough amount of people that people can just kind of unmute themselves and kind of jump in with a question, or if you need clarification for something. And then if we've got any time at the end and there is any questions, then I'm happy to talk a little bit about my process or my experiences in terms of the work that I've done, both kind of here and back in the UK. If there's any questions about that, obviously it doesn't have to be like, if, you know, whatever. So yeah, so let's start with audition. So I think the first and kind of most important thing to say, particularly for actors in your position, is to remember that the very first rule, I think, is remember that you are auditioning them as much as they are auditioning you. And that's something that we don't often talk about, right? That as actors, so I started life off as an actor. I'll go back a quick step because I realized I haven't done that. So yes, so I sort of kind of, I haven't sort of worked with any of you guys directly on shows and stuff. But yes, I started life off as an actor, and then I moved into directing. Now sort of 12 years ago, I started working professionally as a director. Most of my work in London and around the UK, and then obviously like I live and I'm based in Salt Lake at the moment. So yes, so let's jump back to what I was saying. So yeah, so kind of remembering that you're auditioning them. Does that make sense? Because particularly here in Salt Lake, nobody's doing it for the money, right? Like the measly amounts of like gas money that you get offered by shows. So you're not there for that. So when you're working professionally, there's a completely different relationship, which is that if I'm paying you, then I own your time, right? Like if I'm giving you enough money to pay your rent, to feed yourself, to put gas in your car, then I own your time. If I'm not, then you have to be getting something out of it. Does that make sense? So, and not all pay is fiscal. So what you have to do is you have to think to yourself, well, what am I getting out of this? Do you know what I mean? If I'm not doing it for the money, am I doing it for the experience? Am I doing it for the part? Am I doing it to kind of work with somebody who I kind of like? Am I doing it to work at a place that I'm kind of interested in doing it? Have I written to people at bigger companies and they've said, great, just let us know when you're in something, and now here's an opportunity for me to show off? Does that make sense? So part of auditioning the companies that are auditioning you is going, even before you sign up for the audition, it's about going, well, what do I get out of this? Like, what's the point, right? You know, what is my pay going to be if it isn't money? Yes, so that's the first and kind of most important thing to remember. Has anyone got any questions about that? Danny.
Hi.
Hi. Cool. So then the next thing then is sort of preparation, right? Or, well, no, let's go back a step. Like, what are auditions for? That's the other question. So part of this is about understanding kind of how directors think, so that you can prepare kind of properly for what you're doing. So really simply, I mean, on its most basic level, they're there to kind of cast the shows. I know that seems like a really obvious thing to say. And so as a director, what I'm looking for is, do you understand the play, right? Do you understand the world that the play is in? So if I'm asking you to come, so for example, recently we had auditions for producers, right, at the Grand. And one of the things that we said was, come with a song and a monologue in the style of the show. So part of that is about, do you understand the material, right? Have you got a sense of where this fits into kind of shows overall? and the type of kind of comedy or the type of drama or even the type of music. Like if we're talking about musicals, right? Like kind of there's the verbal dexterity that you need to kind of munch your way through Sondheim, which doesn't exist with, not doesn't exist, but is less present in other musicals. Do you know what I mean? His is a really kind of like wordy, sort of intellectual kind of language, which is very different to something which is a bit more sort of light and frothy, right? So do you understand that? So when we're talking about choices of material, there's that, right? So if you're asked to prepare something as opposed to kind of reading sides, like, do you understand the material? Do you understand the kind of the show? So when you're choosing your pieces, you're trying to choose pieces that are kind of in that world. And if we're talking about speeches, there's a couple of rules. Oh shit, I forgot something really important. Sorry. To go back to the beginning, all the way back. Fuck. And that is just my opinion. So take it with a pinch of salt. You don't have to agree with everything. One of the dangers sometimes of being a student is that whoever's kind of leading a session or whatever.
Oh, it's frozen. Very much so. No.
Come back.
There's a couple of rules. Don't get seduced by material that is at the end of plays, because sometimes we can go and watch a play and there's like an incredible speech at the end and you think to yourself, oh fuck, like that's it, like I'm really moved, I'm going to take that into an audition room and like they're going to be really moved by it. And part of the problem with that is that you haven't had any of the build up, right? You haven't had the 2.5 hours that precedes that speech to kind of get an kind of emotion prepared. Does that make sense? So like you're choosing something kind of out of context, you know. The other important thing is to make sure that like all of the information that the person needs who is auditioning you is contained within the speech. Does that make sense? So if you're constantly if you've got a speech which is about somebody else and you're constantly referring to that person but we don't know who they are, you're lost. So your speech has to be a little show in and of itself that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and contains all of the information that somebody needs for that, you know. So yeah, so not getting seduced by kind of big emotional speeches that happen at kind of at the end of plays, you know. If you're talking to somebody in the speech, I would just put them above the eye line, put it above the heads of the person who you're auditioning for, because that way I still get to see your eyes, but like I'm not relying, or you're not relying on my kind of eye contact. Does that make sense? To kind of, to get through the speech. But I want to see, because the eyes is where all of the magic is happening. So like I want to see that, but I don't want you to do it to an empty chair, because for me personally, like when people do it to an empty chair, I like look at the chair and obviously there's no one in it. And so you're kind of responding off like reactions that aren't there. Does that make sense? Whereas it feels a lot less weird for that person to be up above my head, you know, and that they're kind of over there. And also depending on the speech, it can be really weird. Like I had someone come and audition for me probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was really angry, and she was just like screaming in my face, and I was trying to like take notes without taking my eyes off her, because I was like, oh, she really needs like this connection. But she started it with like, you fucking prick, how dare you, and like screaming in my face, and I was like trying to take notes while keeping, yeah, no, I know, while trying to kind of keep my eyes focused on her. Or what will happen, the other thing is, if people don't care, which a lot of directors don't care, is that if you're looking at them and you're trying to kind of connect, they're going to look away to make notes, right? And there's the possibility that suddenly you get thrown off your stride because you were relying on this kind of like eye contact that is now kind of broken, you know. Any questions so far about any of that?
Right before you were talking about, you got kind of frozen for a little bit. So when you said you were going back all the way to the beginning, what were you talking about?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my internet here is really shoddy. Sorry, I was just saying that, like, what was I talking about? Yeah, just about where you kind of find speeches. I was just talking about kind of not choosing stuff that was the big emotional kind of high point of the play, you know, and that can be really sort of, yeah, it just doesn't work in an audition, you know, because you've had this 2.5 hours inside a dark theatre with lighting and set and kind of other actors to set the mood. And suddenly what you're trying to do is kind of recreate that in a room at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon under strip lighting, you know, and that doesn't work. And you don't have the support of like the rest of the play. And it's sort of number one mistake in terms of choice of material, is that you see somebody else do it and you go, fuck yeah, that's really powerful. Like, that's really touched me when I'm watching it in the theatre, forgetting all the other stuff that is supporting that moment that has moved you. Does that make sense? So you want to find the information that you need. Any other questions on that? Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Okay. Yes. So, talking about kind of coming into auditions, how we sort of enter the room, kind of what our process is when we walk in. So really the best tip that I can kind of give you is about directors and producers and the people who are sat behind the table, is they're looking to you to set the tone of the audition. Does that make sense? Because sometimes what happens is you walk in and they're talking and like we're waiting for you to say something and you're kind of waiting to be told what to do, or you stand near the door kind of a bit sort of awkward and kind of shuffle your feet. Do you know what I mean? So like keep it simple and kind of keep it clean. And you know, so when we were auditioning for the last round of plays at the U, we saw 180 people in 2 days, right? Fucking exhausting to kind of to be that kind of emotionally engaged. And after a bit, what you want is you want the people who are coming in to take control. Does that make sense? So you walk in, set yourself up, introduce yourself, introduce the kind of the speeches, say hello if you want or whatever, and then kind of getting on with your speech. But that's what people want, is they want to see you take action and they want to see you be in charge of the room. And bear in mind, everything that I'm telling you about things to not do, they're all things that I did, right? So like I've made every single mistake in the book as an actor, like every single one, you know. I've chosen the wrong stuff. I've like stood awkwardly by the door. I brought too much stuff in with me. So then there's that awkward moment where I finish the audition and I'm like, oh, thank you. And I'm like getting my fucking coat on and my bag and they're just sat there in silence waiting for me to leave so that they can talk about my audition. Does that make sense? So kind of a clean, quick entrance and a clean, quick exit is what you want, and be in charge of the audition. Does that make sense? Be in charge, because here's the thing, you've earned that time, right? You've earned that 3 minutes, that 5 minutes, whatever it is. That is your time, and you have the right to be in charge of kind of like, within reason, right, of kind of how that is used. And it's good for me because as a director, it's like, I want people to for them. Do you know what I mean? Like I want what a pain in the arse. I'm so sorry, everyone. Yes, so like I was saying, is like I want people to be, I want the actor to kind of take charge of that moment. You know, it's your audition. You get to kind of decide kind of what you do with it. Does anyone have any questions about any of that so far?
I have a quick question. I've been thinking about what you said at the beginning, more along the lines of like you're auditioning them as much as they are auditioning you. I know as a like being new in my career and not like having done very much, I want to say yes to everything, no matter like what I think about it, or just because it's an opportunity. Do you have any thoughts about saying no to things and what the balance is? If he's not frozen.
Good question, Hannah.
Thanks, Sid.
I really can't wait for these parts of the recording where we're all just waiting.
Okay,
The six of us smiling.
program ready? Good one.
Sorry, Hannah, go on.
I'm still losing you a little bit.
So Hannah, you were asking about you auditioning the people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. So finish your question.
I'm just curious about the balance of saying no versus saying yes to everything, because especially as like as we want to say yes to every opportunity presented to us.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's. I think you've got to kind of like. I think it's okay to say no. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a totally valid response, and part of the reason is because like I want co-collaborators, right? Like I want people who kind of want to be in the room, and also you sort of want people who understand their value, right? So sometimes when people say no, it's about they're going, actually, like I don't think this is the right project for me. And the truth is, which people don't really tell you, but you know, like that's what these sessions are for, is that if an actor's like, can I think about it? That I'm not like, oh, fuck them, like I'm never working with them again. Do you know what I mean? It's like I want people who are busy and I want people who understand their value as an actor, you know? So in professional rooms, it's the people who are like, I need to see, or can I have time to think about it? That you're like, oh, those are the people that I want. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of, not necessarily like playing hard to get, but just people who understand their value that works. And it's like, I mean, it's a similar thing to, I remember one of my sort of acting teachers, and you first seeing someone, right? It's like there's something about a person who has an understanding of themselves that is attractive, you know. So yeah, so I think it's really okay to say no. What I would say is like, don't string anybody along. Do you know what I mean? If you know that you want to say no, then just say no straight away, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there any has anyone got any other questions so far? Or okay, cool. So is there something that we haven't touched upon yet? Is there a subject that somebody wants to move us on to, or a different variant on what we're talking about? Like, I want to make sure that I cover kind of everything that people are interested in.
Wait, sorry, Kimmy. I think it would be interesting to hear about what makes an actor, specifically someone you'd want to work with again. So in the rehearsal process, what kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's really easy. And I think it's, for me, it's somebody who's like a good team player, you know. And what I mean by that is, it's like, I take my responsibility really seriously about that I'm the person who then this cast spend time with them. So part of kind of callback yes. So what I was saying is, like, good team player, because I take my responsibility really seriously, that I'm asking you to spend a month with these people, right? And like having to work closely with them. So I will always take somebody who plays well with others over somebody who is a better actor, you know. Yes. Anything else? Oh no. So there's more on that probably. And then inside the room, I'm looking for people who kind of come with interesting ideas. Does that make sense? So like when we're working on a scene, is I want you to have ideas about the character, about the scene, about the things that are going on. Like, I'm not interested in telling everybody what their role is and what they should be doing for every second of the play. Like, it's too hard, right? And also, like, that's not my job. You know, my job as a director isn't to have all the answers. It's to ask the right questions, right? And for actors, part of your job is about coming with an inquisitive mind and kind of wanting to kind of provide solutions to problems and kind of asking questions, you know. So I think it's that, it's kind of an inquisitive nature and somebody who wants to play, right? Like somebody who wants to kind of get into the room and try stuff out and like isn't afraid to fail. And really kind of all of that can be bundled up into the fact that like I'm looking for a collaborator, like I'm looking for a fellow collaborator. And it's hard, right? And it's particularly hard for you lot because you're students. So a lot of the setup is teachers and students, right? So people aren't looking to you to kind of necessarily be professionals, and you're used to being a class where the flow of information is only going in one direction. And that's why it's really useful to kind of work with directors who you don't normally work with, or treating rehearsal processes or doing shows around town as a way of kind of like practicing those other qualities. Does that make sense? Of kind of practicing how to sort of be in a room. And again, it's just, I mean, that's personal, and not everybody is going to be like that. I mean, the number one skill for anybody working in the arts, but particularly in theatre, is nothing to do with your ability at your job. It's your ability to work with people who you don't like, right? It's your ability to kind of work with people who you don't necessarily agree and kind of get on with. because there are a lot of directors, and this might get me into trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway, especially a lot of the people here that I see in town, not everybody, but there are a lot of people here who get into directing as a power trip, right? Who get into directing for kind of all of the wrong reasons. And those are people to be wary of. Like, if you get that sense from people, it doesn't matter who it is, like, you're better off, I think, like, not doing the job, you know, because good directors understand that directing is about serving, right? That it's an act of service towards the people who you're working with, and the other creatives, your actors, the producers, the technicians, whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, look at how directors treat their stage managers. Like, that's key in terms of whether or not that's somebody that you want to work with. Do you know what I mean? Because, but yeah, so the question, what you're asking, sorry, Sydney, was you were talking about like the quality of the actor. And I think it's that. So to summarize, it's to be playful, it's to be open, it's to kind of come with ideas, and it's about like not being afraid to kind of fail, you know. And it's being a co-collaborator. And that starts, I mean, part of the reason that I thought these were good things to put together is this starts all the way back at auditioning the people who are auditioning you, right? Because what we're talking about is like, do you understand your value? Do you understand what you have to add to the process? And once you start to get a sense of like what your skills are and like what you have to offer as an artist, you're in like an infinitely better place to kind of go into the industry and be the sort of person who other people want to work with, you know. And I get asked a lot about professional actors, right? I'm so sorry. So yeah, so just to recap what I was just saying that like I often get asked what's the difference between professional actors and student actors, right? By student actors, like what's it like? What are they like? Blah, blah, blah. Like what's the difference between the two groups? And the difference is experience, right? The difference is knowing that you're going to make mistakes and then knowing how to recover from it. Like it isn't being perfect, right? So I did a show recently, like a one-person show, and the actor on the very first night completely blanked their lines, and they had to kind of go off stage and come back on and whatever. But they managed to like find their way through. And that's it. Like the difference between people who have been doing it for years and years and are acting on the biggest stages, they just know that they're going to make mistakes, and they've learned that that's okay. And they've also learned how to kind of recover from those mistakes. And that's sort of it. So yeah, so does that answer your question, Sydney? Perfect. Has anyone got anything else they want to sort of ask? Yeah.
You mentioned working in the UK.
Yeah.
I know a lot of us are interested in working over there, especially with the amazing theaters. Do you have any advice for people, for us specifically as students from America, to maybe get work in the UK or figure that process out, or maybe just even get your foot in the door in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, and are you talking about, Kimberly, are you talking about going over to study and then work, or kind of wanting to go over once you've graduated to work?
A bit of both. Mostly since I know I'm specifically graduating, like how it is to be like a professional working actor going to find work there, or like just figuring that out. But also like I am interested in like a grad school or like programs like that. So that would also be an interesting gateway to figure that out. But particularly how it is to find work independently.
Yeah, I mean, the reasons why, it's a good question, thank you. The reasons why kind of sort of grad schools can potentially be a good way is that the model for English actors is very different to the model for American actors, in that we have things that are equivalent to like the Stella Adler School or like ACT in San Francisco, which are just simply called drama schools, right? So places like where I went to Central, or like RADA is the most famous one. And these places have been around a long time. Like the school that I went to is where Laurence Olivier trained as a young man, right? So it was like already going and established when Olivier, who's like balls old, right, was like a young man, right? So, so they're places, they're institutions that have been running for a long time. But really what you get through the grad programs is you get the connections to the industry. So normally what happens for an English actor is you go to drama school, your first year is classes, your second year is kind of scenes that are only seen by the people inside the school. And then in your third year, you do lots of kind of public performances. And then you do like an industry showcase that agents are invited to, right? And then normally from that's where you kind of pick up your agent. And then your agent is normally the one who then is the person who kind of gets you the work, you know? So kind of landing to prior experience could be yeah. So for most people, that's why kind of grad school is the
cool.
Yeah. So for most, if any of you are interested, like I know 2 American actors, one from the U actually, she graduated a few years ago. So she was in Metamorphoses that I did in 2012. Who's an actress called Amelia Stawicki. So she's living in England. And then there's another friend of mine who's a performer who's living out there, who trained in New York. So what I can do is I can, if anyone's interested, is I can check with them and give their details to Francesca, who can then send them out to you guys if you want to kind of talk to somebody who's essentially having kind of done what you're interested in doing. And what you'll hear is it's fucking hard. Like that'll be the first thing that they say, right? Because also, you know, have you got a good English accent? You know, because a lot of the work isn't necessarily going to call for American accents. And it also depends on the kind of work that you want to do, right? Depends on the sort of work that you want to do. So if there's a company, a lot of big companies offer like summer schools, they offer kind of training courses and things like that. And it's to be shameless in asking for help. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because this is a brilliant kind of like amazing profession, but it's also fucking hard. And part of that is like not being afraid to just go, hey, listen, is there any way that you could kind of help me with this? Can I have your advice on stuff? Can I ask you questions? Does that make sense? And so if there are companies that you're interested in, look into whether or not they're doing summer courses. Do you know what I mean? Do they have kind of things that you can make those connections with, you know? And they take a long time. Like when I was here for 2012, I wrote an email to Karen being like, Pioneer looks great. Like, can I come and buy you a cup of tea or coffee or whatever and have a chat? And we did. And like that conversation has kind of continued, you know, which has led to kind of like bits and pieces of, for me doing stuff there. So, you know, like I've read sort of like some scripts for her, and I was the associate director when they did 12th Night and stuff like that. So it's also about those personal relationships, do you know what I mean? About kind of not being afraid to kind of write to people. And especially for anyone who's interested in like sort of directing, but even for actors, is that there is the mythical cup of tea that you are constantly having with artistic directors and producers and whatever, where you're like, listen, can I, because, you know, everything's done over tea, right? So you're like, can I just come and buy you a cup of tea and like introduce myself and chat to you, you know? But courses can do that. Like I would say that 90% of my work, probably 95% of my work came off the back of my master's. Even coming out to America, right? Like I was working for the Royal Shakespeare Company and we met a group of students who were talking about thrust stages. these Americans talking very loudly during the interval about thrust stages. And I sort of turned around and introduced myself, and I said, oh, you know, I'm the associate on this play. Like, tell me what you're thinking. And they were on the U's like study abroad program with Tim and Jane. And then I got talking to Tim, and then I directed like a little reading of one of Tim's, and like that was it, right? It was like those personal relationships. And then I spoke to Sarah, and we were both like, oh, we both trained at Central, so we, do you know what I mean? And like, and that was it. And like the very first time I came out to America was to do Metamorphoses in 2012, and it was off the back of that. It was off the back of kind of like conversations with people, and you know, sort of putting yourself out there without being obnoxious. Do you know what I mean? That's the other thing, is that, and especially going to England, is understanding that the English can sometimes find the Americans a bit brash, right? And a bit forward. So just be careful of that, be wary of that in your sort of interactions. Do you know what I mean? Be brief, be like professional. Here's the things that I'm interested in. If you've got time, great. If not, like, I totally understand it. Boom, you know. Like, I've got people all over the country where every couple of months I'm sending emails, you know, out to kind of be like, here's my updated CV. Like, this is what I'm up to. Do you know what I mean? And there's a bit of hustle that you've got to have to work in this business, right? There's a bit of like putting yourself out there and putting in work to develop those relationships that is like a key part of kind of working professionally, you know. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yes, Hannah.
Did you go to grad school for acting or directing?
Oh, directing. Yeah. So I did.
Okay.
I did my undergrad at Central in drama education, and then I sort of toured stuff around schools and colleges for a couple of years, and then I did my master's specifically in theatre directing, and that was at a place called Birkbeck College, which is like in sort of central London. Yes. So any other questions or stuff we haven't touched about? Either it can be about stuff that I've done, but like that's the least interesting stuff, really. That's for.
Can I ask, from like the perspective of an actor,
Yeah.
what do you, if you're starting a project and you've cast and it's like the first rehearsal, what first plane do you want you as the director and the actor to be on? Like, what do you want to make sure that your actor knows about the project, about your relationship, about how you work, and how do you get that across to the actor, and so that the actor can understand and start working with you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a percentage of that happens over time. Does that make sense? Is that also you have to develop these relationships really quickly, but it's like, I want them to be honest. So, you know, if I've never worked with you before, then like it's going to take time for us to kind of develop that relationship. Does that make sense? To kind of develop a sense of like how I work and how you work. Because part of my job as a director, and especially if I'm directing in a university, right? So for example, when we did She Kills Monsters recently, like one of the things I'll always start with is like, what do you want from this project? So I'll go around the circle and I'll ask every actor, like, what do you want to get out of this project, right? When we get to the end, what do you want to have achieved? What do you want to have learned? And I hold on to that, and I write it down somewhere, and like once a week and then less as the show goes on, as I get to know people, I'll go back and like read that and make sure that I'm kind of helping people kind of achieve those things. But it's about it being honest as well. Do you know what I mean? And it's about it being honest. So like, if you don't understand something, if you think that I'm wrong about something, like if you want to be critical about something, like all of that is open, as long as it's done in the spirit of kind of collaboration and that it's genuine. Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes what I have, and I have it on every show, is that I go in, most people like me, and then there's one person who goes, well, fuck it. Like if everyone else likes him, I'm not going to. Do you know what I mean? And they give me like a hard time until I kind of prove to them that I should be there and that I know what I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? But that's about them. Like, that's about their own kind of like sort of neuroses. Do you know what I mean? And the opposite is true, is in the same way when we were talking about, which was my teacher's analogy, which kind of really works, is whether it's in friends or whether it's in like potential kind of like, I don't know, like romantic partners or someone that you're dating or whatever. It's like nobody wants to date a fan, right? Nobody wants to date someone who thinks that everything that they do is incredible, right? And if you do, that says more about you than it says about them. And it's the same thing kind of going into shows, right? Is it's like, I don't want somebody who's like, oh my God, like you know everything and everything that you say I'm going to take as gospel, because it's like, it isn't interesting to me. Do you know what I mean? I'm not interested in that. And people want to work with normal people. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because, you know, you're going to have auditions, you're going to have interviews at places where you're so excited and they're places that like you dreamed of working. But even there, you have to be auditioning them. You know, one of my friends went up for an audition at the National Theatre in London, like, I think it was like 2 weeks after we graduated from drama school. And she was like so excited, like so excited. And she went there and then we were having like a drink after. And I was like, how was it? And she said, oh, but the director was really weird. Like, I just don't get good vibes from him. And I was like, what, like creepy vibes? And she's like, no, not like that. Just like, I just don't think we see the play in the same way. Anyway, they offered her the part and she went and did it and she was fucking miserable. And when she finished, she was like, actually, like, yes, I got to kind of work at the National and now she works there fairly regularly, right? But she was like, but I shouldn't have taken the job. And like, I'll never forget. And because you think you're going to get the job that like launches your career. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've been really, really lucky. Like, I've worked in some really nice places and some really lovely companies. And like, that was the lesson that I took away from the big places that I've worked at, you know. So when I did a year and a half at the RSC, like 6 months in, it was work. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was going to work and like there was a time where getting into the University of Utah was like a big deal. Do you know what I mean? And now as you get closer to the end, you're like, I'm ready to go, because you outgrow everything, right? Like, you now see it for what it is and like you're ready to move on. And like, that's a totally natural part of the process. And that happens the bigger the companies you go to, you know, because I felt like I'd won a fucking golden ticket to like Willy Wonka when I got the job at the RSC. I was like, that's it, right? Like, now I'm going to get inside the dream factory and like, I'm going to see the best of the best. Like, now this is it. And like, you go in and you realize that like everything's the same. Like, you're still going, who moves the chair? Where's my prop? Like, what side do I come on from? Like, all of the same things that you do when you're making work, they're all there. The only difference is you're working with better quality people. You've got more time, you've got money, and you've got the prestige, you know. But there was a lot of the actors there that would come up and be like, Jamie, like, what does this mean? And everyone assumes that if you're an actor at the RSC, you must be like a Shakespeare kind of nerd and like know everything. And it's like, it's not true. It's just people like making work. Do you know what I mean? And like, nothing changes. The circumstances change, right? Which has an effect on the quality, but like the nuts and bolts of like how you put a show together, that doesn't change no matter where you go. So yeah, so this is a really long-winded way of like answering your question, but that's kind of what I mean, is that also like, you don't want to work with a fan. So to me, it's like, I don't want someone to be over familiar if I don't know you like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's not real. It's not genuine. Like, it's not based on anything that is real. But I also have no problem. Like Kimberly was asking earlier on about like stuff in England, right? So I have no problem. Like, if anyone wants to kind of email me or send me a message and be like, actually, there's something that I didn't ask, or I'm really interested in this company or really interested in this type of work, like, what would you suggest? Like, I've always got time to answer like anybody's questions about stuff because people had time for me. Do you know what I mean? So if I could be in a position to kind of pay stuff back, then I will, you know, because I'm also asking advice from Karen. I'm also asking advice from like Wendy, who came in to do no, not Julia Caesar, who came in to do Macbeth, right? She's the executive something at Colorado Shakes. Do you know what I mean? So I'm asking her, people who are higher up in their careers, about stuff, you know. And so that's why, like, I've always got time to kind of like answer questions to people, because, you know, like I said, is that people did that for me. Do you know what I mean? And I'll never forget, like, people who kind of took their time to kind of have a chat with me and give me advice, you know. Anything else that we haven't covered, or another tangent? Yes, Hannah.
Just listening to you talk about the things you've done and places you've been, it's nice to hear that you've been able to create work in spheres that are not necessarily like New York City or London, like what we think of have to accomplish. Can you speak to that, how there's like work everywhere?
I mean, yeah, you sort of answered the question. There is the London trick, you know, and that's changing now. Like, it's no longer the only place that you have to be to make work, you know. And there's a lot of really great work that is happening right here, you know. Can you make a career out of it? Probably not, but that isn't about the quality of the work that's being made here. That's about the kind of economic ecology, right? That's about the fact that, like, there isn't enough high-paying work for you to make your living here. And by doing kind of like screen work, you know, but mainly the actors who are here aren't making all of the yeah. But you're right, there's work being made kind of everywhere. And I think it's about, you know, do you understand the kind of the makeup of the place that you live in? And what's great about Salt Lake is that, in a way, is that it's sort of, this is a really good place to try stuff out. Do you know what I mean? And to kind of make work for people to come and see and invest in making your own work, because you have the opportunities and the spaces and the things to do that. Like, these days, it's almost impossible unless you're really rich or you're willing to kind of take out like a fuckload of credit card, take a show up to the edge, for example, you know. Whereas actually, like, yes, it doesn't have the same kind of size or whatever, but the fact that there's a Salt Lake Fringe, the fact that there are smaller venues, places like Wasatch, that will kind of do a box office split with you, is there's something really exciting about making work sometimes in kind of smaller places. Because also part of what that means is that people aren't as obsessed with necessarily their kind of career trajectory. Do you know what I mean? There's something true about sometimes the ruthlessness of like a London actor or a New York actor. And for a lot of them, they've sort of forgotten why they started, right? They've forgotten the reason, like the passion that drives it, because now it's a job. And, you know, like, I would get knocked back for jobs that I didn't even want, right? I was getting knocked back for jobs for commercials where I was just like, well, I don't even want to do it. And like, I couldn't even book jobs that I didn't even want to do, you know? And for me, that's why diversifying in terms of like acting and like doing a bit of kind of writing and all of those things were really useful, because they were kind of other creative outlets, you know? Because I think for most people, and genuinely, I don't have a kind of moral judgment one way or the other, but I know, but for me, especially kind of growing up in London, is I met jobbing actors and I met artists, right? And I know that like the temptation is to go, well, the artist is the better person. And like, no, that's not true. But the jobbing actor was like, fuck it, like I'll do stuff about like diarrhea pills, like I'll do a crappy like sitcom, do you know what I mean? Like I'll do a bit part here, I'll do whatever. And there were other artists, and I sort of put myself in that camp where it's like, this is how I make sense of the world. Do you know what I mean? Like art is how I process the experience of kind of being a fucking human being and growing up where I've grown up and like having the experiences that I've had. And sometimes the kind of the love of the work is much more present in kind of smaller places, because people are making work for the sake of kind of making work and are doing things that they're interested in. And it isn't about spotlight, right? Like, it isn't about fame. It isn't about like moving your kind of career along, you know, which has to kind of being famous for like the sake of being famous, right? Like, without having a particular kind of talent or ability like attributed to that, you know. So that's the thing. Like, can you pay your bills here just on acting? Probably not. Like maybe that will change one day, but like it hasn't at the moment, you know. But there's lots of quality work that is kind of happening here, you know. And I've had to adjust kind of how I think and how I work, kind of working in sort of smaller places as well, you know. So yeah. Anything else? I know we're sort of coming towards the end of our hour. Is there anything else that either? Oh, sorry. Yeah, go
on. I don't know if this is a question but can you speak regarding the actor that is very versatile, and the actor that knows their type and goes for their type every single time? Like, what do you see as a director with those two different types of actors?
I think the simple answer is that you need both. And some people are both. Do you know what I mean? Some people are so good at kind of playing multiple things that you think of them, they're the first person who like pops into your head when you think of a role, you know. But I mean, because often the criticism that is leveled at actors is that actors are selfish, right? And let's be fair, some of them are, but also part of that comes from the fact that as an actor, you have to be self-focused, right? Like, you are your own product. So part of that is about going, well, how do I look? How do I sound? You know, what are the things that I kind of see myself playing? But sometimes it's really easy to get trapped in that, right? Yeah. Like, sometimes it's really easy to get trapped in that, because that's assuming that all of the work that is being made needs a specific look, and sometimes it isn't, you know. And for me, that's why people like Sakasen are a really interesting company in town, because they're making kind of not particularly kind of naturalistic work. So it sort of doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? Like, or I don't know, like in England, like a company that springs to mind like that are someone like Frantic Assembly, right? Who there isn't particularly like a kind of a type, you know. I worked with them twice, once, both on Othello. We did Othello together, so I was like their Shakespeare person. So yeah, once as an AD and then the second time as an associate. And they're a company that I kind of still have a lot of kind of ties with. And like part of the reason that it was like one of my favorite jobs is that there wasn't a kind of a type of person. For a long time, they even rejected the name physical theatre kind of as a description of what they do, you know. Like, as a company, we talk about the fact that what X equals, right? And that's the way that they kind of like describe their work. So I think, so you need both. And I think it's important to kind of make a decision about not necessarily which one you are, but I would start with, what type of work do I want to make? Do you know what I mean? Like, what sort of work do I want to be involved in? And then that's going to tell you something, right? Like, I know that as an actor, like with my look and my kind of build, and also if I'm not changing it, my voice, right? That it's really like, I know the type of stuff that I would play because I did it, right? I've spent 10 years playing drug dealers and terrorists, right? And that got really kind of boring. And so if you don't want to be pigeonholed, and like if that's not what you're interested in, then look for the people who aren't making that work. Because every type of work that you can kind of think about is being made. And if it isn't being made where you are, then you're in a good place to start it, you know. Because I've worked with like so many brilliant companies, all of whom started out as a rejection of the current industry. They all started out by going, well, fuck it. Like, if no one's going to give us work, we'll make work for ourselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, if no one's going to make those parts, I'm going to write those parts for myself, or I'm going to work with people who are, or I'm going to seek out companies who are kind of already making that work, you know. And it depends on what you want to do, because obviously this is infinitely less true for film and television, which is a much more kind of precise, specific medium. You know, and now we've got television. That's why you kind of don't really need fourth wall realism on stage, because, you know, like, that's what film and television does brilliantly, you know. So I would say start with, what is the work that you want to make? Like, who are the companies that you admire? Who are the directors that you admire? What's the sort of plays that you want to be in? And like, what's the point, right? Like, what are you doing it for? Do you know what I mean? You're spending all of this time and money to go, especially the fucking student fees here, Jesus Christ, right? To go into this industry. So why? Like, who are you as an artist? Like, what do you want to say? What is your message? What's the kind of work that you want to make? And some of your jobs will be, they're going to offer me like $5,000 to do a voiceover, and like, I'm doing it for the money, and like, that's totally fine as well, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong. And the only people I've met who like the idea of being starving artists are people who come from money, right? Like, it's only people with means that are like, oh yeah, it's just such a beautiful thing. And I'm like, no, fuck you. Like, I'm good at my job, pay me. Right? That's it. Simple as that. Because I grew up poor, man, like poor. I brought up in the English equivalent of the projects. Like, we didn't, you know, like, we were broke, right? And so for me, it's like, there's nothing wrong with viewing it as a business. And I have no qualms talking about money. You know, if somebody offers me a job, I have no qualms with saying, well, what does it pay? Right? Because it's important. And don't be scared to have that conversation with people. Because sometimes people get a bit weird about it, and like, they get a bit funny about it, and they're like, oh, you know, like, they get embarrassed or whatever. And like, you don't, and the same that we were talking about the auditions, like, you set the tone. You know, if somebody approaches me and they're like, oh, you know, this is a project, blah, 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 and it's paid, I'm like, well, what's the number? And if they're like, well, it's going to be profit share, like, we're going to take all the money that we make and then we're going to split it equally. If I'm interested in the project, like, that's fine, right? That's fine. But it's like, but I just want people to be honest with me about it. And there's no problem in talking about money. Like, you should never be embarrassed or whatever. Like, and then you can say either yes or no, dependent on that, like, if that's a thing. Yeah, exactly. Because like we talked about, it's like, sometimes the pay is fiscal, and sometimes you go, well, the money's okay, but like, it isn't great. But there are these other reasons that kind of, I want to do the job, you know? So yeah, I think it's growing up how I grew up. Like, I've never had a problem being like, what does it pay? Because it's like, this is what I want to do to put food on my table and pay my rent. Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to do that through art. So if I'm going to do that, then having those kind of practical conversations are really important, you know. And sometimes you're sort of taught to kind of shy away from it, or that, you know, somehow you should be lucky to kind of to do it, you know. Like, with all the stuff that's happening at the moment with like the coronavirus, there was something great online where there were all these companies and these CEOs that were like, well, we can't be expected to kind of run our businesses for no money. And all of the artists are like, no, it would be great exposure for you. Like, it's such a great opportunity for you to just get yourself out there. Do you know what I mean? Because that's what you were told, right? You're like, oh, brilliant. That's really good, because my rent is for exposure. So this show will be really good. Like, that's what I'm going to be able to, like, it's nonsense, you know. And if people genuinely don't have money, then that's one thing, right? If people don't have the money to spend, if the people who are making the show are making the same amount of money as you are, then whatever, you know. And so when I'm working also with directors, it's like I'll tell people, do you know what I mean? Like, I've had people ask me about, and I'll tell, like, if I'm directing a show, like, if anyone wants to know what my fee is, like, I'll tell them. Like, I'm not embarrassed, because I think we need to get away from the sort of, I don't know, like the fear or the kind of embarrassment of like talking about money, because it's important, right? You know what I mean? It's important. It's part of the world that we live in, and like that's okay. Sorry, I know you didn't ask for a political political speech.
Well, I just think it's a thing that I feel like a lot of people shy away from, because it is money and it is the business side of stuff, whereas we're like working on our craft and stuff. But it's important to talk about and to understand that there's a business to it, that it's to make money too.
Yeah, because the university's not shy when they're talking about the money that they want in student fees. Do you know what I mean? Then they're really happy to talk about money, right? Like, you park in the wrong place, you take a book back late, like, then everyone's all about talking about the money. Do you know what I mean? And like, it should work both ways, I think, you know. Anything else before I know we're sort of coming to the end of our time. Is there any other burning questions, whether a subject that we've covered that I haven't talked about sufficiently, or something kind of new? If anyone's got any questions about anything.
I have a question. Could you talk a little bit more about sort of doing the lots of little bits of everything, like doing some directing, doing some acting, doing some writing, doing sort of maintaining that balance?
Yeah, a lot of it has been, especially at the moment, has been about just kind of keeping me sane. Do you know what I mean? About kind of like, so I've started working on adapting like a book from one of my favorite authors into kind of like a stage play and stuff. And I think in America, you're also encouraged a lot more to have a finger in like lots of different pies. Do you know what I mean? To kind of do lots of different jobs in a way that, like, in England, they're like really strict about like, stay in your lane, right? Like, this is the thing that you do, you know. And it isn't vast, my list, really. Like, I think I've done a little bit of kind of writing, but mainly it's kind of acting and directing. And the thing that I love about them, those two main ones, is that as a director, like, I get to see the show. Do you know what I mean? Which, like, you would never do if you're acting in it, right? Like, I get to see it. And also I get to work on shows that I would never get to be cast in as an actor. That's the other thing, is that it broadens the scope of like the work that I can do, you know. And that's part of the reason that I sort of like doing it, is it allows me to kind of access those different parts of my brain. Or as a director, like, I have to have an overall vision of the show and kind of hold the whole story in my brain, in a way that if I'm an actor, like, I just focus on the thing that I'm doing, you know. So I think it's about getting to explore those different aspects, like getting to explore those different parts of not only the craft, but also of specific plays, you know. So, for example, like the last thing that I did, apart from the one-person show, like the last big thing was like She Kills Monsters. And it was like, that was lovely for me to do, because I got to see the spectacle. Do you know what I mean? Like, I got to kind of see what it looked like. And I don't know if anyone, like, if any of you saw it, but like, there was lots of kind of big moments in it that was lovely to watch from the audience. Like the first time we took out the wall with the dragons behind, and like, you could feel amongst the creatives, like, while we were in tech, this kind of little shiver of like goosebumps, because everyone was like, "That looks fucking cool, man." Or at the beginning, having like the She Kills Monsters on the screen, like all of that shit, like that was the first image that I had in my brain, along with the music, like along with the Foreigner track. But yeah, so there's something lovely about a director of getting to translate what's kind of in your brain onto something else, or even what you're doing with Open Door, right? Like a brilliant, like, not only is it fun to kind of organize all of these things, but like such amazing skills in terms of organization, of kind of approaching people, of kind of getting stuff together. Do you know what I mean? And being able to kind of produce is like such a valuable skill, because in general, that's what you're waiting for somebody else to do. So the fact that you can start to develop those skills, and it's fun, like sometimes it's fun to direct, like it's fun to kind of do something where you're not the kind of the main thing, you know, that what you look like and what you sound like isn't the focus. And especially for actresses, because of, you know, because fucking patriarchy first, it's so much more on those things, you know, in a way that like doesn't exist for men. so being able to kind of get rid of that stuff, and I'm not saying that there aren't problems, you know, like obviously kind of sexism exists across the board, but in theory in directing, you're kind of getting to do something that isn't as about you as kind of acting is, you know. Anything else before we finish? No? Cool. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys spending the time.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry about the fucking internet. But yeah, so, and you know, Francesca's got my email. If anyone's got any questions about anything, then like, please feel free to kind of reach out, whether that's stuff in England or stuff that you kind of didn't kind of think about, but now you've got questions on or whatever. Like, I'm always happy to kind of answer people's questions. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Great.